హాయ్ విసు, ఎలా ఉన్నారు?
అండి బాగున్నాను.
యా, ఐ థింక్ ఇంకో ఫ్యూ మినిట్స్లో అందరూ జాయిన్ అవుతారు కదా.
అవును.
ఓకే అండి, అయితే జస్ట్ హాయ్ చెప్దాం అనుకుంటున్నాను. ఓకే.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Luis.
How's everyone doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. I guess everyone's Gen AI experts now, right? So, and then probably as people come in, I knew Saturday sessions there was a lot of questions being asked around sort of AI agents and what to do just around certain use cases. So it was a really good conversation that we were having.
Hey, everyone. So, internally, in our company, we were looking at like where we can use AI, like within our team. for our product, right, where we can use AI. It was kind of hard to figure out like where AI can add value, like Gen AI, where it will add value. So one I think simple use case was document search, all the run books and all the help documents that we have. For anyone who joins, they can like have a chatbot that can explain instead of giving some trainings for them. But other than that, it was pretty hard for us to figure out where it will actually add value.
That's a good question. So, how we come in as consultants, for example, when I work in with different companies, we step down and we do sort of a walkthrough of business cases, right? So, we look at all your different departments, we look at your different areas, and then from there we look at all the different things that take time, um, whether that is, right? So I don't know if you were looking at simply just your department or you're looking at the whole company that you're at. Do you know, like, are you looking at just your own department or are you looking at like sort of company wide?
No, just our own department.
Okay, and your department is
Ours is a big one, like database cloud team at Oracle.
okay. So the database team. So again, we're the top IA cases for the IT time, right? So it comes down um, to when I work with the IT, there's two one of the big cases that we work with is user story and Jira testing. So we know sometimes when you create a new project, you need to go on, you need to start looking at Jira, you need to put information in, you need to create the features, you need to create the epic links, you need to create the stories, all that needs to process, right? So where the biggest ROI comes from is having a Gen AI be able to develop and help you produce those works, create those stories, creating those Jiras, and helping really push in that information. So there's different ways you can look at Gen AI cases. One goes through project management, documentation, coding, etc., that type of ways, right? So we have example, I'm not selling, but like in terms of what are different ways you can do it. You created something called Elita that you can look into. It's pretty much we developed in-house, but if you're looking to do our AI use case for yourself, that could be something you guys can look into, read it, and be able to do if you want to develop your own type of system that can do that, which talks and speaks to your Jira platform or whatever project management platform you have. Be able to read your epics, read your business cases, read your stories, and develop prompts in there to sort of help you streamline that process. And that would really be the biggest impact in so far right now in terms of the IT process that could really help your department.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll look into that. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I found that we're working with another company in terms of gaming, and they were looking into how can really AI improve that sense, right? So what we found was we actually created these agents that did edge cases on testing deployments. So if you were to say, okay, we're deploying this new cloud-based system, or deploying a new database, how do I know all the relations are working? How do I know this and that? It's having an AI chatbot be able to help build out unit cases, test cases, edge cases, and be able to speed up and think of different ways to test the deployments to make sure it's to really get that in, right? And so you're really taking over that BA's job by creating your own BA, your business analyst AI, and that would really provide real value because now you're looking for holes in your own departments and providing value that way.
Okay.
So maybe you can look into that. But if you have any more questions you want to brainstorm, just let me know. I can help out with that.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Luis, since we're discussing same issue, so I'm just wondering, like, most of the time, AI, like, it's not alone a Gen AI. Uh, I mean, that can be a kind of a UI on the top layer, but most of the time we need some ML models or deep learning models to analyze the existing data, right? There are a lot of raw data available, like say logs, um, or like a timings, like metrics of the system, like um, so. Do you? I mean, do we have any systems such that, like, I mean, um, that we can combine this ML model and Gen AI so that we can use the existing data, the raw data, which was not collected for an ML or a deep learning.
Yeah, so can you give me an example of that? Like, so example, like where you want to combine an ML, the Gen AI model, like, maybe you have an example on your head or?
No, basically what I was saying is like, say I have a lot of data of a metrics of a system. So that's there from a while, and I want to say, I'm just giving an example. I want to predict how much time this particular target of a build or or if this particular job, how much it takes based on the past data, right? Say we have a lot of data which was collected in previously, for example. So uh, so I know ML was there from a while. ML. So does that make sense? Still, like use ML and generate the more uh, like uh, generate the average time, for example, or a median time. It is predictably. I know we can use mathematical functions to do that, but um, is that make sense to do such kind of jobs, or is it too small for that job?
Okay, that's a good question. So I'll come back and talk about two things. So one, every single time I go into a project, I always look to determine what we're trying to achieve and what are the needs first. So if the job needs to be deterministic and it needs to be something that it needs to be the same output and it needs to be mathematical, then this is something I would steer away Gen AI from, in terms of doing the calculations. So this sort of example would be if I'm doing something, could be something predicted, I'm going to use a forecasting model in ML to predict the future cases of if I run this database, and this things change, how long would it take for me to run this? What's the forecast of that? Like I would use an ML forecasting model to do that, right? I wouldn't use Gen AI. What you can use Gen AI is when you have databases that, let's say there's a string value that talks about what are the different fields, and no one's filled in what this field means. You can use an LM to generate the context field of describing what all the columns are in this on this area. But you would need to sort of, for me, what makes sense, it would have an ML model to look at, let's say, run times of databases, or you would use an ML model to forecast of if I were to do this change or to run this query, how long would it take? What would that cost my compute times? All that information. So you can then, yeah, exactly. You can put context, you can put sentiment, based off using LLMs that way, something like that. But in terms of forecasting that, you can have another layer which gives you the output. Let's say you're running an ML model and you have a forecast output, then you can have an LLM read that forecasted output and give a summary at the end. But you would need to build out your own information that way, if that makes sense. Like you would still use an LM to build out that forecasting model. Like an LM still can't do ML right now currently. Like you could give you the
Okay.
code to run the ML, but it won't build you that deep learning forecasting model on the fly, right? So this is something you could do.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good example.
Yeah, and that was something I was talking about today. I was actually in a conference. On a conference, I was at a Databricks conference today, and they were doing intelligent database relationships, but they weren't using Gen AI for those things, right? It's part of their own algorithm on the back end of how they look like, how they predict run times, relationships, all that in the end, but they're not using Gen AI to do those predictions or enhancements or computage information.
Okay. So Gen AI is one of the building blocks, but most model, I mean, if you really, when I say AI, we need all the ML as well, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
so when you say AI is like the whole picture, right? AI is ML, AI is generative AI is algorithms, right? So AI is just
uh,
the all-encompassing name of that.
all the buzz is now with only generative AI right now,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
ML and deep
4 years
learning, yeah,
ago, 4 years ago, if you're
yeah.
not building a machine learning model, you're not doing AI in your company, right? So So
Right.
now you say the word AI, they expect you to see Gen AI, right? But that was the buzzwords of the past. But before it's like, oh, have you not built a regression tree? Have you not built a decision tree on this? Have you not did the other thing, right? Like that was the buzz of 2-3 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Luis, continuing to the same question. Okay, compared to the traditional models like maybe in machine learning models and the generative AI models, like the developers have less work. I believe is that correct. Models are available. Most of the work is building the RAG and also maybe doing some guarding, like LLM guards or some using creating guardrails and defining the policies, which is bias. All these things. Apart from that, then what is the main role maybe going forward? Because right now everybody wants to build a internal chatbot or something like that, and that's why we are using generative AI or RAGs. If you take the traditional models, we have like future engineering and future selections, and also maybe we need to play with different parameters. A lot of things are there, but that time, like we have a lot of work. Scope developers have a lot of scope, but coming to these generative AI, I think the scope is getting limited. There we need to learn what is cosine similarity. There are a lot of algorithms, chi-square, all these things. Those are all part of that one. But here, like the scope is various. That's what I feel. And please let me know if I missed.
Yeah, and I agree. So the difference is that ML models are very mature, right? There is a cadence. Do we know that data engineering? We know that from the ETLs to your data to feature engineering to data cleaning to developing models to even capturing drift in your ML models, right? You can build a whole CI/CD pipeline. There is a process around it. So in terms of maturity, ML is very mature and we know how to catch it. We know how to fine tune it. We know how to do different things, right? So when it comes to generative AI, like you're saying, right now it's sort of the wild, wild west in terms of people coming in and doing POCs, but how are you catching drift? How are you going to catch this? How are you evaluating this? How are you looking at that way? There isn't that maturity, and this is what causes majority of POCs to fail. And companies when you start developing, I think right now, I think it was like I saw 80% of most Gen AI POCs don't make it to production. And the reason is the people who go and implement it or even trying it aren't bringing in an evaluation standard. They're not bringing in terms of what privacy, security. They're not bringing in software engineering excellence to the code as well. So there's a lot of things that are not following the same procedures as you see in a typical ML model. So how do you get there? How do you move it, right? How do we transition from one to the other? And that's something we'll have to see as we continue on. Example for us, where I'm working at, we try to do same software engineering principles, the whole SDLC life cycle with Gen AI in terms of understanding where the security is from, where's the API being sent, where's that information being saved on, what platform are we working on, is that information going in, information coming out. Once you start building your Gen AI POC, what is the top evaluations? What are how are you going to evaluate these metrics? How are you going to evaluate something non-deterministic to make it proper? Are using or what kind of metrics are you going to use for this project, and how are we going to define those benchmarks are right? After you define that pipeline of, okay, these are the benchmarks, this is how we're going to grade it, there needs to be a business decision saying, okay, if the model is 90% right all the time, is that enough for a pass or fail? If it's a fail, then it needs to go back and try different tunings. And then from there, once it goes live, how are you logging? How are you capturing the information? How are you going back and reviewing the information? And this is something that each application is different. For example, RAGs, it's a little easier because if you're finding ways to capture the interactions and you can have real-time individuals saying this is positive or this is negative. If it's a negative experience, write in what it should be or write in what it's missing. You can then grab those comments that are being said and put them back into your pipeline and put them as new vectors into your vector database. and continuing to improve your RAG as they come in to get better answers, right? So long as you do that continuous loop in production monitoring and RAGs, then you would have a really good defined system, like from top to bottom, from building to end. But if you're doing something else, then it's like you have to figure out what it is, right? But if you're using GenAI just to do sentiment analysis, you're just using GenAI to create content, using GenAI to do the things, then they don't need as much rigor as deploying a RAG in production versus just you trying to say it's positive or negative to a document, right? So it's really as we continue and progress down this field, you'll start seeing that companies like Amazon or companies like Azure start to try to build out that rigor, just like an MLM product is. But right now they're not built. There's some that actually are building it, some of them aren't. So it's really up to who's deploying and creating the GenAI POCs in your company and ensuring that you're going through all the different validation checks of doing it. So I know that sometimes in the business, like, well, I want to try this GenAI. Can someone go and try it, right? And they just go and build their own chatbot and say, okay, this looks good. And they do a vibe check, right? Do you think it looks good? Yeah, I think it looks good. Then that should be good enough. But a vibe check shouldn't be done for validation, right? So
Amazon is
Sorry, can I go ahead or?
yeah, go ahead.
So Luis, actually, want to ask you a question about RAGs in specific, right? If you take the traditional LLM models, correct? I'll give you an example in like why I'm asking this question, but let me just first the question, right? My understanding of the RAGs is it's specifically for the GenAI and not generally useful if you're using the traditional LLM model, traditional model, not the LLMs actually, traditional models, right? In our use case, right? Like we have the what is it called, prediction. We do the prediction as in like I'm a part of the CI/CD system, right? And then what we do is like when the changes come in, we predict like what test to run so that like we run them in order to save the compute and all, right? Because it's virtually impossible for the work that we do, right, at scale. It's impossible to like we'll probably spend billions of dollars. We already spend millions, but then like we'll probably end into the billions if we run for every change, every test that comes into the system, right? So essentially we do the prediction, right? In that particular case, I don't believe the RAGs are useful, right? We do the like modeling, predictive modeling, right? And then we do this like every time we and then there is a constant change, not change actually, the constant enhancement in the new features, existing features, and all of that stuff. We are building the feature store and all of that stuff, right? We are doing a very dirty way of doing things, but now we are doing more a traditional, a proper way of doing identifying the features, feature engineering, and then a model which uses these features with a combination of XYZ, build the like champion challenger model, run them in the production system, and then see which one trumps the other, and then iterate it over and over, right? In this particular case, like would RAGs ever be useful at all?
no, and that's where looking at the whole CCI pipeline, RAGs are more meant for be able to add context to an
Right.
LLM to do that. So if you had anything in your CI/CD pipeline that required an LLM to give its response, then you would probably need like yeah.
So in this context, evaluate me kind of a thing.
Yeah, like if you have two codes,
Okay.
like the thing is like unless you have a plugin for Python for your LLM model, but you could have your two codes up to there, right? And like I know that comes to the point of how you want to make it. You can use something called LLM as a judge. Let's say you have your two codes. You have your one in your challenger code, and then your challenger comes and say, I think I can make this more efficient. And if you really want a way to do it without running the whole pipeline and running everything to see what you could do, is that you can use an LLM as a judge based off historical information and say which one you think is more efficient, right? And then the LLM will read your whole code and then give out a score saying, I score this one higher versus this one because this is using this efficiency, this efficiency, this efficiency, right?
Okay.
So that could be a way that you could save money running the whole pipeline. But again, that would just have to be very, very regulate it and see if it's right. So I
So
would
in
do
this right, in this context, the one you're referring to is, like I'm doing an like example, like putting two algorithms against each other, right? Like to say,
Yes.
like tell me like which one you would feel better, kind of a thing, right? One area where we are heading to is, like obviously, like when you see the stack traces and all of that stuff, right? Historical information, how people have fixed it in the past, kind of a thing, feeding that in the context window or as a part of the context with the stack traces, and historically how people have fixed it and all of that stuff, and then throw suggestions to the people as a part of the IDE plugin to be able to, like change it, kind of a thing.
Yeah, for that, I wouldn't use RAG. I would fine tune. So I would definitely, I would use like a smaller model, Llama 3.1, like 8B, and then grab all those examples of here's the code, here's how the code changed with comments, and grab, let's say 100, 500 examples of that. Put it to your model and say you are now a code reviewer, like give the prompt. You've been like, obviously this is how I would change codes based off like my historical information, and please use it continuous. So then now that you would run your model, you can have your LLM read the code and identify, hey, this is the code that that you did in the past. They can train on saying, oh, this is wrong because of this, or this is the code, I would change it because of this, right? You're fine tuning the model now on historical information and go from there.
Oh, okay.
So you can plug that into your IDE and continue from there. But yeah, like it would be an awesome use case.
But like RAGs are pretty much useless, right? In this particular case, pretty much.
Yeah,
I'm not saying completely, but yeah.
Like I wouldn't, yeah, like it would be unnecessary compute because then you have to go in and
Right.
the thing is it wouldn't work because you're just trying to feed it context, and the model would say, I already know Python. Why would I go to your RAG, right? Like it's not gonna, like the LLM's gonna be like, well, I already know Python. RAG's gonna tell me that I can read some more information about it, and so it won't pull you up the information. RAGs are useful when you're trying to add additional context to the model, but not for training the model, if that makes sense.
But actually, how did it get the business context though, right? And like we don't want anything to be doing just an like, probably I can give you a little more context to this, right? The thing is, in like every application, like imagine this is an like a legacy application, right? And like 20 years ago, like people were building their own frameworks, and like they had their own secret sauce and all of that stuff, correct? Like so essentially, it is not a plain Python or Java or any of that sorts, right? It has a context baked into the system, like, hey, this is how you set up things, like this is how you like these are how you set up things, this is how you execute things, but this is a prerequisite if you have to execute these kind of things, right? So there is a dependency chain kind of a thing, correct? Which is, I'm 99.9% sure that context would not exist in the, like as if you would take a simple like example, Spring framework or a Struts framework, or like any of the, or Flask, applications developed in Flask, for example, right? That kind of a thing, like I'm 99.9% certain that this wouldn't exist, kind of a thing, right? That's where probably RAGs would be useful, probably.
So it depends on your use case. So example, like if you're looking to, someone's asking a question, how can I set up this program? Then you can do a RAG that looks into that past, into your documents, and pull the information out and answer, right? Like it's really, so I would say vector storage is really good for Q&A. Like if you have question and answer coming out, like those are really good to do a Q&A. But in terms of doing and changing, that's where I really push for a fine-tuned model that then grabs all the context of your historical documents. You create something called QA pairs, question and answer. Like here's a paragraph from your data. What could be a question that could be asked on that, and then fine-tune your model like with that model. And then if you need to make changes, do things, the model already knows it and then does it. So if you're looking for something that does things, then you go fine-tune it. But if you're looking for as a QA pair, if you want to do something where you are actually having conversation with the model to understand more, then you can do a vector store. That's how you just have to define what you really what's the end goal.
Oh, okay, makes sense. Thanks, Luis.
No, sir, you had a question? Yeah.
And also one more question. Satya was mentioning he was having a lot of features. He was doing feature engineering. Generally, the best way to do, I'm just in case if I missed out, please add it. The best way to do feature engineering is if I have like 10K features, like 10,000 features. And if I want to pick up where like maybe very good features, one way is PCA. But apart from PCA, do we have any other good mechanism?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So we're going back to some ML questions. So we know that PCA is a really good, there's factorizations, there's different ways to reduce the amount of features you have. But another way to do it is I would run a simple decision tree and then I would do a feature importance to see what other ways we can remove it, but it also depends on how much compute you have, right? So if the 10,000 rows, let's say you grab it and you run it, but it's like millions and millions of data, you're going to run out of memory quick. If you don't have a good compute, it's going to cost hundreds of dollars, right, just to even run that. But if, let's say in a perfect world that you can run it, you're not going to get anything back, then I would probably just do feature importance. There is one more that's sort of skipping my mind that you can do to pull out that's not PCA. There is another way to change to get to get the top features from it. And the thing is, when you do this, there's different ways you need to look at the data too, right? So not only is feature importance, obviously to look for data leakage as well towards your target. Look for remove any columns that have any data leakage, and then you're looking for heteroscedasticity, right? Anything that could affect it as well on that side. So once I usually do I do the 3 checks. I look for data leakage first, remove anything with data leakage. 2, look for any columns that have heteroscedasticity. It's been a while since I said that word. And then 3rd, and then I go down to, if I'm still left with 10,000 columns and I'm down to that pointage, there is different ways to looking at. So I'll put in the chat a couple of techniques so you can look into.
Sure. And also coming back to the LLMs, one more question I have is, and Amazon Bedrock is there, how different, and it is providing the Cloudia. There are a few models available. I'm not.
Sorry, I can hear you. So what's your question?
And Amazon, Amazon is coming up with, previously we were talking about the process. Right now, there are not a proper established SDLC process available. That's what you are telling. And following to the same question, Amazon is having the Bedrock. And it is providing some of the Cloudia and some APIs, some of the, I don't know exactly, it is providing APIs to some of the LLMs. I think, no, I'm not sure exactly. Some of the API tokens. And how different, and if I want to use the Google or Gemini, can I use it in the Bedrock, or I need to use only those only? I need to use whatever Amazon provides only.
So if you remember in the first class, you can go back to the slides I did. There are some models that can be used in certain areas and other cannot, right? So example, you can't use Gemini models in Amazon. You need to collect that from Vertex, like from the Vertex AI, from the GCP area, right? Create an endpoint that way first, then be able to pass it. You can't do example, like I think same thing with ChatGPT. They're exclusively only on Microsoft right now in terms of that information, right? So they have certain legal contracts with other companies in order to show their models. But in terms of deploying, you can't deploy a GPT model on Amazon Bedrock. So how do you do this? How do you get other models in there? You have to create the API endpoints with these other companies, and then work with a way to get that API endpoint to your Amazon Bedrock side. And then from the Amazon Bedrock side, you then be able to deploy, right? So for those proprietary models like Google and ChatGPT, you have to have those 2 separate APIs directly from them, and then move them to your Amazon site, and then be able to pull it, right? Because then they have to figure that service out. But now I know. But now if you have open source models, this is something that Bedrock does provide access to, right? So mixed trial, Meta's models, etc. And a lot of people were tied to ChatGPT simply because they were the best model out there. But Meta is doing a really great job. If you look at the factors, Meta 3.1405B is just as smart, as close to GPT-4o, their top model. So if that can be an open source model and you don't have to go through different providers and it's going to give you the same information, then it's better to use, like, it's better to then open that model. You can grab it from Hugging Face and then from Hugging Face import it into your Amazon Bedrock, spin up a cluster, put the model in it, and then be able to use that API to access your information. But like I was saying before, Amazon already has certain APIs already set to go. So you need to have give a call with Amazon and whoever the provider is, ask them what models are available on their server, and then from there be able to get information.
Thank you, Luis.
So yeah, so example, like I was working on one where you have to make sure that and example, like there's different companies that have good products that can pull in different models and be able to run different models, right? So example, if you're on GCP, GCP wants you to use their Gemini models, like that's what they want you to
Yes.
use. But they have their model garden, which you can use open source models, pull it in and run it. But they're not going to let you pull in ChatGPT into their space. They're not going to like that, right? So you really, if you want a really a good platform, you have to find a platform that lets you pull in APIs, regardless if they're from GPT or they're from Gemini, etc. It would have a platform that's able to pull in all those different APIs from different places, right? So you just have to be sure of your securities, ensuring that you have a contracts with them, and ensuring all the information is done well, right? But that's how you would do it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, hi Luis.
Yeah.
Regarding RAG on code generation, right? So if people use like code generator like Codium or something, but instead of generating, can we provide, like, let's say we have a reusable Python library where we want the code generator to use that and give those function usage instead of just generating the code. Is that possible, or
Yeah, so that's so
is it like overkill?
Yeah, so I was saying before that it's on your use case, right? So RAGs are really good at Q&A, of question and answering, and adding context in. But if you want something the model to do, this is where you go fine tuning. When you fine tune a model based off information, when you ask the model to do something, it will do it rather than try to look up information from a vector store, trying to read it and then try to answer that out. Like, because would really, to me, when you go up in an LM, it will conflict in saying that if the model was trained on Python before it was trained on doing coding, it's trained, let's say it's trained on PostgreSQL, right? And then you have your own type of SQL that you need to be using, and then you're asking, give me this code, regardless that you're giving it a vector storage of different types of SQL codes that you want it to do, it's going to use its own memory first before it hits your vector store to answer, because it's saying, well, I already know SQL.
Okay.
Spawned out. So when you fine tune a model, you're pretty much putting a layer of knowledge on top of it, and you can say, no, I don't want you to use any PostgreSQL. I want you to use other types of SQL that I'm looking for, and you trained it on that model, and then it's going to use that what you fed it to answer it, right? So you're using fine tune to make it do rather than to answer.
Okay, thank you, Liz.
Well, these are really great questions because it comes down to the point of how can you have how can you make a business case to fine tune? How can you make a business case to do this? And again, when you're looking in your own company and you really want to provide a high impact story, right? And this could be something you're doing yourself and you really want to build it out? How do you make sure you have the right tools? How can you show your boss that you're working on a really cool project that can really enhance your processes? So before going down the route of saying, oh, I'm just going to use GenAI because that looks cool, go back down and think about what are you trying to achieve and what is like the ROI coming from it, right? So if you're doing something that could save, let's say 5 hours a week or 6 hours a week, what does that mean in terms of a year and then times and then versus the cost of using the LLM per month? And you're saying if you can see a big ROI difference, then that's definitely the use case you can do, and you can present your business case that this is a really good use case of AI.
Thank you.
Same. No, so today I was at for those running, I was at a good conference, again, talking about different providers, looking at different ways. Azure has opened a couple of trying to get better at their Gen AI games. Bedrock has opened up to be more acceptable to using models through APIs, and loading them in. So it's really about having that layer of being able to work somewhere with an LLM and be able to call it, right? So whether it be in so you really need to find something that you can call it in. You can sort of create your own model. You can create your own registry. You can hold it somewhere. You can just hold where that API is going to be. Would be the best part for you to do. Again, if you can't get that, you don't have those permissions, and you have a strong MacBook or a strong computer that has 32 gigs, try downloading a model from Hugging Face and be able to run it. And unfortunately, in this class, I was looking at when can I be able to show model loading, things like that. Looking at the weeks, we only have a couple weeks left. So this week, this Saturday, we're going to go through RAGs, understanding it. I'm going to do a multimodal, how to do a multimodal RAG with images and text. So you can have sort of an example of yourself going through this, but it's going to take me at least 1 hour to go through the basic concepts. And then it's going to be another hour walking through the notebook, doing the walking through it, how we're going to do it, the different models that can do vision, and go from there, right? So how to do this with a multimodal model versus just using two different models, a vision model and an LLM model to do RAG as well. You don't have to use a multimodal model if you don't have the cost, right? So we'll be going through that. The fourth, and then I think after that, I think is our fourth week. That's our fourth week. So our fifth week is then going through AI strategy, how to implement best practices, how to do exactly what I was talking about before, developing a good roadmap for an AI project from beginning to end and how that would look like in terms of like AI excellence, I would say. And then the sixth week is your final project. So this is where this is where we're looking at times and what can really be taught in the end though. But there's so much information you can go through, definitely.
Thank you, Luis. And also, is there any way that you can show how to productionize the model also, like deploying to the AWS or any cloud, maybe theoretical, if not practical?
Yep, well, yeah, what we'll do is maybe that fifth class, as I go through the strategy, I'll talk about how after you use um, I could talk about maybe the endpoint. Maybe I'll say how about using, I'll just maybe use MLflow, right? For basic, because MLflow is open source.
Yes.
So I'll just show how to load something to MLflow and go from there, right? And then use that as an API URL, and then you can use that for an API. You can use that in a Streamlit app or whatever it is, but I can definitely show that.
Like completely productionizing to the any provider, maybe theoretically possible or not.
Yeah, I'll look at that.
Yes. Also,
And Luis, one question. For any kind of technology-based companies, are you familiar with like how they are benefiting from Gen AI, like how they have adapted Gen AI?
Yeah, I won't say the specific name of one that I'm working with right now. So they're sort of like a top layer of a piece. So they connect to your database, they connect everything, right? And they can the information. So how do they make money? Because what they do is they help fund Gen AI POCs and everything. And the reason how you make money is, for example, this vendor lets you create vector stores in their database, right? And then there's a cost to own, there's a cost to hold vector stores, whether for example, I'll throw one out like Pinecone, right? Pinecone vector store database is really great. It's super fast, allows hybrid searches, but there's a cost to hold your vector store. So obviously, just like holding a database, there's a cost to that. And depending on how much vectors you have, will increase and amount the cost as well. So first of all, they're going to make money off that vector store. Second, when you run your models, you're using compute, right? So depending on where you're running your models and running your code first is that compute instance of running your code. The third way to make money is that if you're hosting your LLM, let's say in this place, or hosting it, let's say Amazon Bedrock, you have to pay them to host your LLM model if they're open source, right? So if you're loading Amazon 3.27, like 405B, you're going to need at least 2-3 graphics cards for that. You're going to need at least 100 gigs of RAM. You're going to need something like that in order for the model to make super fast inference, right? So that cost of hosting that LLM increases more if you're doing if you want to do a private LLM, right? They make money by having one that's sort of general, and then other people can hit it, and then you only pay for like your API cost for hitting that question back, right? And then they can make the money off that way. But so those are the different ways of how these companies are making money off Gen AI, and it's not cheap. It's definitely not cheap to create your own vector store. It's definitely not cheap if you're, let's say, you're creating a chatbot and it's like 12 cents a query, and you're like, oh, that's not bad. But then you make it public, and then you have 5,000 people hit it in the first day. Then first the whole month you bankrupt, because then you spend over $300,000 doing API calls, right? So it's really having those controls costs in place. You need to have visibility, transparency of, oh, let's say there's a maximum of $50 that can go to this department that can use APIs, or $100 APIs. There needs to be controls in place that API spendage is not over it, because then not only the company who's hosting the LLM for you gets money. If you're using a proprietary model, then that company gets money as well. So there's lots of lots of ways to make money in the Gen AI space. So hopefully that answers your question.
Cool. My question is kind of thank you for this question. That could be my follow-up, but let's say we work in a technology-based company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they have been there since pre-AI term. Now this generative AI came. How is companies can benefit from Gen AI? Like, what kind of Gen AI tools or techniques they can adopt in a typical technology-based company or any general company?
So yeah, so it comes to how can how can AI adoption,
Yeah.
how can they benefit from how can a company benefit from Gen AI adoption? So that's pretty much your question, right?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yep. So there is a Gartner report that's really great on this. It's called Gen AI Adoption and ROI. So it's from Gartner, and they talk about how CEOs come together, and they're talking about how can certain AIs really benefit, and if it does really benefit, how does it benefit in the bottom line? And so generative AI has two big top ROIs. So one is in the customer service center. Those simple text and answers, inputting chatbots, queries, things like that, has shown significant increase in ROI. Reducing workloads in call centers has shown really big ROIs adopting it that way. The second one is actually through IT in terms of coding. So if I think it was 2 weeks ago that the whole, I think there was a CEO of Google said that 40% of their code now is written by AI. So what does that mean? Does it mean that their code's actually being written by AI fully? Is that it's helping them complete their code faster, execute faster, find errors in their coding, be able to do that as well. Like I said, third is in also IT is in the Jira stories creation, things like that. It usually takes we usually take a week or two to do even backlog feature creations, or if you're working through agile methodology, how to do all those stories and write them all out. It would take your delivery managers, your project managers days to create this. Now it could be done within hours using AI to help build out those creative stories from there. So it's really about finding efficiencies in the workplace, finding ways that would take lots of times to do and be able to shorten that in a very small time. So this is where I gave those different notebooks last week. This look at sentiment analysis, fraud detection, doing NLP techniques that way that used to be older, and finding ways to capture better ones that can look at context, right? Using those type of use cases can really benefit and speed up the process in those different ways. But there's lots of different use cases for even finance, marketing. Like I'll give you some parts in IT. But there are, and people are taking advantage of this. And there's a big company out there that's taking a huge advantage of this and trying to push it forward by having an AI assistant while you code in your notebook to fix mistakes, or being able to use text to SQL AI code generator. That so you have a database and you want to find the relationships. What's the relationships? It's able to go and present you all the relationships. Or if you wanted to, like I said before, even write the comments, like what's the common strings of all the different fields. Have a GenAI pre-produce them all and fill them up. In terms, there is like whatever was really good. There are use cases where you're just building more efficiencies into your program, right? So how I usually approach it in terms of when we work with companies is what's going to give you the highest ROI. And then we sort of build out the stories that way. There's this use case, there's that use case, there's this use case. But in terms of the top ROIs, which one it is. So then you choose the top one that is ROI and say, okay, we're gonna do a walk, sprint, run, right? So walk, run, sprint. You do 1 month of POC, then you do the MVP, and then you go to production from there, right? So and you're trying to show in the POC that actually provides real ROI and that you're able to do what you're meant out to do, right? And that's the whole point of learn fast and spend lots of money, but to fail quickly if it isn't what you're trying to do, right? So
Cool. Thank you.
yep.
And Luis, you mentioned one case, like LLMs are greatly used in the for the service industry for chatbots. And in case if they're making 5,000 users, if they're making a lot of calls, the company can run out of the money. You were mentioning can go bankrupt because every call they need to make, if whatever the call they're making to the LLM, they need to pay. So
Correct.
in order to, if you take that case, just in order to handle that one, is whether to use their own LLM model or private. Instead of every call they're making a lot of maybe 10 cents or what, I don't know exactly what maybe the call. What is the best way to handle it? Maybe use their own private model, or else maybe there will be a lot of junk users who don't want, like they don't want they're not the real users, they're not the real customers. So is there any way to filter out a non-real customer base before actually processing to the LLM, making a call? So
that's a really good question. So are you talking about a public facing chatbot, and then you would say?
yes.
Yeah. So there's something called you can do something called an input guard. And this is called an input guard. So it does when you before the RAG comes through, before you send it off to an LLM, it will grab the input and then go a guard, and these will be certain rules that say, is this related to my topic? Is this related to my company? Is this related to this? This is related to that, and is related to this. You can have these rules sort of an input guard, and that when the input comes in, it goes to this code first that you have certain rules, and then you can say, sorry, I can't answer the question. It's not part of my base. So it's super important to have these restrictions in place in order to be careful of your costing. Another thing you can do to help reduce cost as well is called caching, right? Just go simple like normal chat. If someone asked the question before, you can cache the answers, and you can tell your LLM before answering, look at the historical cache and answer those, and use those in historical chats before answering with an LLM as well. By using input guards, caching previous questions, you can really reduce the significance of your LLM. But the whole point, like, is also to have those monitors and alerts set up. And this is where most people fail as well, is that they trust the system saying, like, I'll just open up the API. I won't put, there's not gonna be any, I'll put like whatever it is, and then once they let it open. So there's one company that did this in the sense that they're opening up, let's say they built their own chat system, right? And they were able to pull in different APIs in, and they were out telling people, use this instead of ChatGPT, use this instead of that, and then you can ask your questions and our API will answer it. They figured that it's only 12 cents, it wouldn't be that much. But then there's one user started using it for everything, their homework, asking questions, going out, blah, 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 blah. And then that user racked up like a lot of, example, you used, I don't know, I would say, let's say $5,000 within like 2 months of just answer questions like that. And they only had pretty much a $50 budget per department to ask these API calls. Because they didn't have the current controls in place of transparency of usage and setting up a budget, this is where you could fail in an ROI project as well, because then you spent the whole money for the next 4 months and no one else can use the project as well, right? So it's really, you have to be very careful of how you do it. If it's a public-facing chatbot, input guardrails. If you're doing a launch and you're launching it to different users, there has to be a control in place as well. And how you can do a cost control is simple. It doesn't have to be a complicated thing, but you can pretty much just write a code that looks at how many APIs are coming in, times that by the cost, and that should be a rolling sum of every single time someone hits an API, right? And the output cost of the API as well. Then you would have your calculator be able to sum up quickly of how much is being used, and then you could put a restriction to stop API calls once it hits a certain budget, right? But those are then coming back to your business parts.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And, yeah, the filtering out input guard, that is good. I understand. But if I'm using the caching, when I'm using the caching, even I need to pass the caching to the LLM. I need to make a call to the LLM. Still, that itself is a cost. I want to clear.
Yeah, for sure. So you can build something called an orchestrator, and usually example like Streamlit does this too, or you can use another application, or how you built it out is that you can have the conversation start, and then once the conversation user puts an input, then you can put the first code is run through input guard, and then your input guard will then run it, and then it says if it's passed, then pass to LLM to answer, right? So you don't have to use an LLM call to then check the answer out. You can do, you can in your orchestrator of receiving a message, next step is to then verify in your input guard if it's meeting your criteria. If not, stop and then come back with this preemptive respond with, sorry, I can't answer that question. Do you have another question you can ask? Built inside the input guard rail. So you're not hitting your LLM, you're doing that. Then your second step could be check if in cached bank. And then if it's in cache bank, then use the answer in the cache bank. If not, then go to the other one. So those are the different steps.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. Does anyone have any burning questions? Okay, that's awesome. All right, guys, can't wait till we'll talk on Saturday, and we'll be going through some rags. So have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.